Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I am really thankful to be joined by Nagesh Rao. Nagesh, how are you doing?
Good, Matt. How are you? It's a Friday, and I'm wearing one of my favorite comic book T-shirts, the periodic table of superheroes. So it's a good day.
Yeah, I was going to
And
say that was one of the first things I noticed. So I appreciate you pointing out the shirt and giving a better look of it.
yeah. It's got all the Marvel comic superheroes. I have one of the DC comic superheroes as well, but this one's the Marvel one, and I'm excited for next weekend because Ant-Man comes out. So I'm like all amped up for that. Ant-Man and the Wasp.
I
I want
didn't.
to know what happens. I want to know how they're going to bake in Ant-Man and the Wasp for Avengers Infinity War, because I know this is the movie takes place right after Civil War, pre-Infinity War, but there's got to be a transition point like at the end of the movie as to like how fast forward to Infinity War, and then definitely, or maybe another Captain Marvel reference, but I don't know. I'm excited for that. So
That's a little bit deeper than I am with the Marvel universe. I have been watching my Marvel Netflix shows lately. I'm in the middle of the second season of Luke Cage right now. I
I,
caught
I,
up on some of that. So
I've heard good things about Luke Cage for sure.
definitely, I hope you have some time to check it all out. But I didn't obviously expect that we would start out like that. But I appreciate it, and I think I to I tried to always segue everything. So I'm gonna say, speaking of a real world superhero, I'm thankful to be joined by you, and I'm excited to dive in and kind of learn more about you and the work that you're doing and what you're up to.
Yeah, well, so I wouldn't classify myself as a superhero. Um, it's, I just go get it done. Like it's all about moving the needle
Yeah,
and move the needle in the right direction. That's my focus. That's my passion. I do what I do because I fundamentally believe in the good work I do, and you know, I said this the other day. Um, Conviction is an essential ingredient into the that one must have as part of the ethos of their leadership.
hmm.
And so,
Oh wow.
um, yeah, I am one of conviction. I'm one of conviction around change, modernization, and ensuring an egalitarian society results. And my work is towards that.
Wow. Yeah.
If there is a superhero who I appreciate and enjoy a lot of, is it's MLK. And when he said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and I
Hmm.
firmly believe that. You and I know each other through the launch world, and I think that is an example of some of the amazing work that is happening and how we can empower public-private partnerships to occur. I mean, that was one of the most unique uh, when it first started. It was some of the most unique ingredients I'd ever seen in my life. Where you've got NASA, Nike, USAID, and State Department saying, "Hey, we're going to do this effort." I know it's evolved since then, and there's some new partners in play like IKEA and whatnot. But I thought it was fascinating that the first four folks who came together in 2009, 2010 timeframe, I think it was.
Yeah.
Um, as I got involved in 2011, but
Mhm.
just watching that germinate the way they did. And I remember Victor, Todd, and we were talking, and I looked at him and said, of all organizations, Nike and State Department, and and Victor said it was because of the fact that it was such a unique set of ingredients that were put together. It made everyone pause
Mhm.
and say, what do they have cooking that is of interest to us, that could be of interest? If I recall, the first challenge was around that was the bio one, right? That was health, and then
Yep.
the next one was water, and then I got involved in the third rendition. I had already knew about it, but I got intimately involved in the third rendition, which was around clean energy,
Mhm.
the energy initiative, and I've been involved with green chemistry, and ever since I've always been involved in some capacity, whether it's just been a cheerleader or an actual, like, where, you know, from time to time I'll get tapped and say, okay, council member, you're coming back into the game. And what's been fascinating is that challenge. You know, for those who don't know, the launch public-private partnership was driven around grand challenges, and that grand challenge was a prize. And what it was testing people out there in the innovation ecosystem community to say, if you've got a great idea, you know, tell us about that great idea, because we will like to review it, and if it's solid, we'd love to invite you to this, you know, basically this convening of the sorts of movers and shakers in the innovation ecosystem field who would potentially get involved to help move it forward. Mm-hmm. And that's huge.
Yeah. And I think it's powerful because you bring up a great point, like to counterpoint your statement that you're not a superhero. Like, I would say there are so many real world superheroes, and that's kind of why I have 180 degrees of impact, because I get to have conversations with them and learn what actually makes them. And I think what you come to learn and realize, and something you probably have seen through launch, is that there are tons of people making a difference. And, you know, with the right, really with a lot of the right support, with the belief in themselves, people could be real world superheroes as well, to kind of continue to play off of your shirt. But I would love, actually, if you could tell me and anyone who's watching about, you know, what is it that you're up to and working on nowadays, and how do you introduce yourself to people typically when they ask about what you're up to and who you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not even sure I know what I'm up to half the time. You know, so I'm an engineer by heart. That's, you know, that was my original background, was materials engineering, and I'm a problem solver. And so I ask myself, how can I use my skill sets to do good? And so, you know, projects that I've been involved with have really been driven around technology and innovation and scale up of good technology, good science for the betterment of humanity. And part of that was through my work with not only just with launch, but also with the Eisenhower Fellowship. So when I was an Eisenhower Fellow, I explored the notion of how do we get promising next generation technology out into the field to other folks, mm-hmm. in communities of interest that didn't have access to it. Mm-hmm. And a big example of that was clean energy. So, you know, here in the U.S., we are fixated on industries of the past. And in the emerging economy, you know, energy resources are just not there at the same level that we have. Mm-hmm. And, you know, how do you globally expand wind energy or biomass or solar and stuff of that nature? And in the emerging economies, you know, they don't care. It's a blank canvas for them. And so one of the things I've been pushing on was, how do the U.S., you know, startups and innovators in that space think about a global aspect of their technology development, not just a domestic purpose? Technology is agnostic. I mean, everyone, you know, these are agnostic tools. And the legacy assets and infrastructure here are not built the same way as they are overseas. Overseas, they're ripe it's a blank canvas. They're ripe for the introduction. So if you think about mobile telecom, for example, we, as in America, we actually helped pioneer that technology, right? But where do you think the adoption happened significantly first?
It's a good question.
It was India and China. It was a decision. Yeah, it was a decision made by those two countries in the 90s to say, hey, look, mobile wireless technology is coming online. The proof of concept is there, and there's an actual rendition that we can work with. Why would we try to all of a sudden have landline technology when we could just do a leapfrog into this newer stuff and perfect it? And that's what they did. And so landline just never really evolved in those regions because it was at that point considered to be the start of an outdated technology.
Mm-hmm.
So they adopted mobile wireless technology, which spurred the markets up and initiated the further widespread adoption of the technology, which then forced us as a country here back in America to, to rethink our infrastructure and say, hey, maybe we need to be emphasizing on this as the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm really fascinated because just, the work that you're doing is really fascinating, but even just thinking about technology, I was talking with someone earlier this week in a 180 Degrees of Impact conversation, and he's a technologist, and I realized how little I know about technology and its potential. Like, I've grown up as a digital native and a millennial, and it's great because you have that exposure to so many kinds of modern technology, and yet there's so much potential out there that I don't even realize, and I'm surrounded by people within launch and otherwise in the world who are making impact using technology. So my big question for you is, when did you first realize that this is something you're passionate about, especially when it comes to tech and social change and making a positive impact?
So that exposure for me was actually in college.
Mm-hmm.
During my alma mater at Rensselaer Polytechnic. So I had gotten accepted into what was called the National Science Foundation Research Experience for Undergrads Fellowship Program in the summers of 2000 and 2001, and I did my projects over at Cornell, and so it started off with RPI just because our university was driven on the notion that science, technology, engineering, knowledge and thoroughness for with purpose for our work, applying this work towards goodwill, and it started from there. And then I was working on this project during summer 2000, which was really cool, and it was around semiconductor manufacturing, but it was using benign CO2 as a solvent reagent for the reaction of processing. So to simplify this, basically, so I was working in semiconductor manufacturing. It's a very energy and chemically intensive process to manufacture semiconductor wafers, and it's not environmentally friendly. And the notion was, how do you the project was with Chris Ober and his team at Cornell, and he was basically like, is there a way to work on this manufacturing capability to make it more environmentally friendly? Mm-hmm. That was the notion. And so the idea was, could we use supercritical CO2 as an etchant material to process the photoresist polymers on this in the semiconductor manufacturing and come up with an environmentally beneficial reagent rather than using hydrochloric acid or the other I think was it fluoride, but some of the other more caustic chemical reagents that would be used to etch the acids, that is. And that's where it really started to open my mind up, is like, hey, look, you can solve some really cool, tough science and technology problems, but actually make a massive impact with that. And speaking of that, so Steve Sasson is a friend of mine. I got to know him through the AAA Lemelson Invention Ambassadors Program. He was one of our, as I'm on the advisory board for that, he's one of our first ambassadors. And Steve is an alumnus of my alma mater, RPI, and he's the inventor of the digital camera. So I remember asking Steve during a panel session we did a few years back. I said to him, so how much responsibility do you bear for the selfie? And it took him by pause for a moment when I asked him that, and he kind of looked at me funny, and he said, as an inventor, there are intended consequences and unintended consequences that we're aware of. And then he said, there's also perverse consequences. And it was with the perverse consequences where he said, I think I I put that end result of the selfie resulting from my invention as a perverse consequence that I didn't know was going to happen. And so,
Wow. Yeah.
and I actually, and just to add that on, so a couple of years later, Eric Fossum became one of our invention ambassadors as well. And Eric is the inventor of the CMOS Pixel, which is the digital camera on your mobile technology.
Uh-huh.
So now we have it where I've become friends with Steve Sasson, who's the inventor of the concept of digital camera, and then Eric Fossum, who invented the Pixel, the CMOS Pixel, the camera phone. Mm-hmm. And so I asked Eric the same kind of question, and he gave me a little bit more of a profound answer, but the same thing. He was kind of like, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm a fan of the selfie either. But however, it was during that time when I was doing the panel with Eric Fossum, separate from the Steve Sasson situation, where my friend and colleague Shirley Malcolm, I don't know if you know who Shirley Malcolm is, but she's a rock star. So Dr. Malcolm works for AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She is also one of the first African-American women to get her PhD in, if I recall, zoology. She's on the board of trustees at Caltech. She's a phenomenal woman. So Dr. Malcolm, said, I want to address this whole selfie kind of issue. And she said, it's because of CMOS Pixel and digital cameras that we can actually have democratization of information. Mm-hmm. She said, that's the beauty of this technological innovation that no one realizes is that people are now able to take their phones and document in real time, good and bad situations. And in case in point, like, Dr. Malcolm said, as she's a, African American woman, she said people didn't realize that our community was being accosted at times. And she said, with the camera phone, we could now tell our story and show, hey, here's the brutality that happened to our people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is not us making this up. Here's physical evidence. It's the same thing actually when, with the Arab uprising in Africa. It was in the Middle East when it was because of camera phones. So everyone said Facebook, Facebook, Facebook. It was also the camera phone technology that was out there that documented that, and people could actually physically see, hey, this is happening. Now there's a double-edged sword with all that because it and Steve Sasson, we've all talked about this, like it brought down the definition of the veracity of data. With this technology, you get data points, and hopefully it's good data. But if it becomes bad data, manipulated data, that becomes an issue. So it's these kind of things that has driven me, like over the years, like as I've been exposed to all these areas of interest with science and technology, it's inspired me, but it's also driven me to say, okay, how do I use this to solve true problems that need to be solved?
Right. And I love what you were saying about how, like, oh man, I feel like I'm going to keep going back to the superhero thing. It's like with great power comes great responsibility, sort of thing. Unintentionally going back to referencing that and referencing Spider-Man kind of idea. But I think it's so true, and it's interesting because I often think about the positive aspects that people could accomplish with technology, and I learn so much about that and see so much of that. But on the flip side, there are so many challenges that we see with, I think the hot topics now are like privacy and cybersecurity, and then you think of the abuses of certain technology, and I don't know, it really makes you think about how important it is for us to continue to use technology for good. And I appreciate that you're really focused on how we can do that. I think one thing I'm wondering from you is you have so much knowledge and wisdom of technology. And I asked a similar question to someone else in a conversation recently. Like, how do you retain and gain all that knowledge? Like, how do you learn all that you know essentially about technology and using tech for good? Is it through conversations with people like Shirley Malcolm, or is it through other means?
Yeah, so it's not just through conversations. It's been actual projects I've worked on. So like I was a code creator of the Patents for Humanity program, the iSix Green Challenge, the Growth Accelerator Fund competition. Some of the projects I've worked in my personal capacity with colleagues in the public and the private sector. Um, Stuff I did with startups and folks in Silicon Valley years ago. You know, a project I'm working on with friends of mine in Sri Lanka. So like I've been in the game for a long time. I've been at it since '98. But one of the things that was actually huge was in 2016 when I got tapped to be an Eisenhower Fellow, because that was, you know, that's a program for aspiring leaders who are, you know, diverse, dynamic doers, and that program seeks to bring out multidisciplinary driven leaders to collaborate, to cross-pollinate, cross-collaborate around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so in case in point, I found out last year during our South Asia Rising Conference in Dubai, because the reason why the South Asia Rising Conference happened is because it was a few Eisenhower Fellows, one from Pakistan and one from India, who said, hey, we should get everyone together from South Asia, sit down and talk about how we can bring a peaceful coexistence amongst the region.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically a bunch of us fellows together of South Asian descent who said, let's figure out a peace plan for the region. No more conflict or reduction of conflict. And in part, this was inspired because we had found out that Eisenhower Fellows from about 2 decades prior had played a substantial role in the peace accords in Ireland, when the region of the UK and Ireland, Northern Ireland, was undergoing a very radical transition of the sort. And it was actually Eisenhower Fellows who had done the back channeling and engaging and connecting to assure a peace accord to occur. And so it's through that model that a lot of us across the world have been using to figure out ways to bring about peace in our regions of interest. And so a bunch of us from the South Asia region have been convening to work towards that. It's a phenomenal organization. The people I've connected and worked with are amazing. So like I'm very proud to be part of that community, and we are a community of change agents for good.
Mm-hmm. As you continue to do that sort of work, because I know you're deeply embedded in the community, if not to embarrass you or flatter you on purpose, but like really a cornerstone of like the tech community, I would say, at least from my perspective, I guess, in a sense, like from the outside of your work looking in. I'm wondering if there are any solutions or innovations that have stood out to you in particular that you're most proud of, just looking back at your experience. You mentioned since 1998 doing a lot of this work. It's a lot to choose from, but any that come to mind immediately?
Actually, yeah. So of a lot of the different things I've been involved with over the years, I think the 2 projects that I've played critical roles in that I was really excited to see not only come to birth but gain traction were the Patents for Humanity program and then the Growth Accelerator Fund competition, because they both were experimental pilots that proved my theory right. Mm-hmm. With Patents for Humanity, there was a way to figure out how intellectual property rights could be balanced for humanitarian needs and good, and not allow for intellectual property rights to be a inhibiting factor, but rather a cajoling factor to increase and encourage better innovation for all to benefit from. Open innovation kind of notion. And Growth Accelerator Fund competition convinced my thesis that the innovation ecosystems were not just in Silicon Valley, Austin, Boston, and Raleigh, but they were definitely growing across the country. They just needed a leg up and a chance to prove themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that competition proved it by cajoling incentivizing communities to come together and say, yeah, we will do this. We can do this. We will foster a true innovation ecosystem on our own.
Mm-hmm.
We just need, a little bit of help to validate our model. And that's, I think those are most recently two of the projects I've worked on that really helped, made a difference. That I've now seen tangible results come about.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that it kind of makes me think, like a lot of what I see you accomplishing, I am in awe of it in a sense, because I almost can't understand. I don't understand, like how does someone get started to make that kind of difference or start those types of projects? Like, what advice do you have for people who want to do? Maybe it's in their own interest area of, let's say, food and nutrition or ocean health, whatever it might be. Where do people actually get started in starting a project that makes a tangible impact in your eyes?
See a problem that you're passionate to solve.
Yeah. And then beyond that, what are the next steps once someone has that problem that they're passionate about solving?
Finding the right people to help you solve it.
Okay. So it sounds like
it's a people game.
Yeah.
It's not a technology game. It's not a problem-solving game. It's at the end of the day, it's a people game. Getting the right people in the room with you and saying, all right, we're going to do this. And it comes back down to what I said in the beginning, having conviction as part of the ethos of your operation.
Yeah. It sounds to me, though, that like one of the biggest problems that people have is that they don't immediately look for that community that they could work with and build together with. And so I think that is really strong advice potentially for someone who's looking to get something off the ground. Like, just considering the fact that I know that you do meet people who are making a difference, building things, creating things in one way or another, is there other advice that you find that you are typically giving business owners or giving entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs who want to make an impact? Just general advice that you have that you find yourself doling out oftentimes?
Yeah, there's a lot, but I think one common one that I tell folks a lot is let the critics say what they want to say, prove them wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've had so many critics in my life. It's not even funny.
Oh man.
I've always had. Oh yeah. Anything I've worked on or done, I've had people try to poo-poo me on.
Yeah.
And I go, okay.
Yeah.
And then I prove them wrong.
Yeah.
And then they come out to me later and say, oh yeah, you were right. And I go, oh, that's great. There are haters out there, and so don't let the haters get the better of you.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those lines I actually enjoyed a lot. It was you remember Dr. Dre 2001?
Oh God, what's the line?
It's a line in the album where what's the difference between it's from the song What's the Difference Between You and Me? And Dre basically was like, y'all think you're tight with me now after I made it big, but basically he was like, you now mention my name, but you fail to realize that like I'm so big that I don't even know who you are, kind of thing. Like go ahead and mention my name, but I'm so big that I don't even won't even recognize the fact that you mentioned my name. Is basically what he's saying. I got hold on. Let me Google it up. I haven't heard it in a while, but it is a line that like that I've enjoyed because it's.
No, definitely Google it, because I think that, I mean, at least what it sounds like though is it's all about like having that focus and that determination to do what you want to do, and then people will have the feedback. One thing I always think about and find so interesting is that like we all put out projects that are open for people's feedback, open for their criticism, it might be praise, and yet I'm assuming you have the quote pulled up, which I'll get to in a second. But I mean, I kind of I always find it's interesting whether it's positive or negative feedback, because I often think like, that's great. It's great to have your feedback, and feedback is great. It's good to hear from people, but it doesn't always change the course of what you're doing, especially if you're focused like you and like Dr. Dre and the people you're giving advice to.
Yeah. Wow, I just got thrown into the same category with Dr. Dre. I hope to aspire to be Dr. Dre. I've enjoyed his music for years. I'm a Gen X kid, so as a Gen X kid, Dr. Dre was was required listening for a lot of us. Not just Smashing Pumpkins and Nine Inch Nails and Pearl Jam and all those guys. I mean, but Run DMC, Dr. Dre, all that stuff. That was required listening for us Gen X kids. So I'm not going to say everything because it is a little bit caustic in nature, but I just love the fact he goes, claiming that they nonviolent, talking like they spit venom in interviews, speaking on reunions, move units, then talk, shit, and we can do this. Until then, I ain't even speaking your name. Just keep my name out of your mouth and we can keep it the same. It ain't that I'm too big to listen to the rumors. It's just that I'm too damn big to pay attention to them. That's the difference.
Wow. I feel like you need to record like the whole, like one thing I would love is if you had an album that's just you giving like the quotes and that, I don't know what it would be, but something where you're just pointing people to that kind of advice, because like that's deep. And I don't think people realize how deep that is and how it actually translates to a lot of the people that we meet, and a lot of the work that we do as it relates to making a difference, I guess.
Yeah, and so like that, so that's not even one of his most popular songs from the album. It's a deep track. Oh, I don't know if it's a deep track, but it's not one of the more popular tracks that I've ever heard. But when I got the album and I heard it, it became like one of my favorite songs of all time.
Yeah.
To listen to when I was in a Dr. Dre moment, because it was, what's the difference between when you're having a bad day or something like that, and people hate on you for no reason, and then you listen to What's the Difference, and you go, yeah, well, you know what, that's right.
Yeah.
The difference, I shouldn't care about what you say or what you do, because I got my deal, I'm doing my thing, and I'm going to succeed because once again, it goes back to the original quote. I said, if conviction is built into the ethos of what you do as a leader, you'll be fine. And so, conviction's an incredible ingredient. And what's funny, you were kind of mentioning before the comic books and the rap, we were talking about hip hop music and stuff of that nature. Here's the thing that I find interesting. Let me make sure I got this right. Wasn't it Kendrick Lamar got a Pulitzer this year, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's huge. That's huge, because that's now basically telling that is society saying that medium, the medium of rap music and hip hop, is a serious medium of consideration. It is, the snobby hottie toddies who would be like, oh, classical music, blah, 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 that's it. Like, no, it's the fact that we are now taking a moment to appreciate new mediums. So like my buddy Matt Wright and I, like we had this long conversation years ago when I moved back to DC, because some folks had said, oh, you're into comic book movies, comic books and all this stuff. Oh, that's so stupid, blah, blah, blah. And trying to iterate some point that true literary masterpieces are in, stuff written by Kurt Vonnegut or Sartre or, Jupna Lahiri and stuff of that nature, like these critical books of nature for critical thinking. That's cute and all, but that ain't shit. That ain't true. That's shit. And I'll tell you why. Because the comic book medium and science fiction medium are mediums that talk about heavy duty issues in a very creative and unique way. So, for example, just out of curiosity, if do you know what inspired the X-Men comic books to come about?
Wow. I'm surprised I don't know. But I'll let you tell me before I embarrass myself.
No. So if you look into it, Stan Lee talks about it for years, but the X comic books were an allegory for the civil rights movement.
Okay, that was actually going. Believe it or not, that was going to be my guess, but and also based on probably around the timing of it. But it's a good point, I think, too. Especially if you, I mean, even just looking at your shirt too, it's like, and the idea of X-Men, where it's all these people who are outcasts, mutants in the context of broader society and looked down on, and yet they do have so much to offer, and that's something. Sure, it applies to X-Men, it applies to tons of superhero movies. I mentioned watching Luke Cage and that applying to that, but like it is something that happens in real life where there are people who are making awesome contributions and who are discounted for whatever reason, if not just because they're different. So yeah, I think it's interesting. What else? I know you had another point to add, in regard to
Oh
that.
no, I mean, so science fiction is always a precursor for science fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We years ago I'd watched Deep Space Nine and all that stuff, and then now like half the technology we play with is technology that was kind of toyed around and discussed in Star Trek and stuff like that. Like Google Glass, I saw folks playing with the Google Glass a few years ago, and then I was like, wait, that's the stuff that Commander Sisko was using on Deep Space Nine. Yep, pulled it up. It was in that episode. Same with the tricorder and stuff of that nature. The comms device. That's your modern day cell phone. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there today that was baked into science fiction thinking. Now we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're getting closer to it. I think true artificial intelligence won't happen for another 15 to 20 years, but we're getting there.
Yeah. 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 I think it's. I guess what I have a couple more questions to ask you. One just being, we were talking about Dr. Dre a second ago and X-Men, and we were talking about all the Marvel universe and mentioned all of that. But is there anywhere else where you would recommend people look for inspiration or wisdom on just to inspire them and push them to make a difference and create that thing that they've to put it in one sense, like that they just had tucked away under their bed and have been waiting to unveil?
Community service projects.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if people actually did more community service projects and got into the muck of it,
Yeah.
they
That's
would.
that's interesting. And I think it's especially, I mean, that that's a good piece of advice, because oddly enough, I feel like people have been very engaged in like the dialogue, which is important, but I think I haven't actually heard the phrase community service thrown around as much as you'd think it would be with people nowadays. But yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice, and a simple, straightforward one, because it comes in so many forms. It's everywhere. But
Yeah, just, you prove by example, and so like, you prove by example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember during my sister's wedding years ago in the 90s. It was a thing we do in our family. Like after a member of the family gets married, the next day a community service project of some sort happens, and that was a preparation of a meal that you fed to the poor in India.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff of that nature. So actually, I would from time to time try to volunteer some time over at the DC Central Kitchen.
Yeah.
And if I can't get there, at least I would donate money to the effort.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. And there's a lot of wisdom and information you have to share. I think that's one of the sad parts about 180 Degrees of Impact, is that we only could go into so much in so little time. But I do want to ask, just thinking about what you've accomplished, because you have accomplished quite a bit in the work that you've done. We've talked about a lot of it. I want to know what you're hoping to accomplish, and more specifically, if your life were a book or a documentary, I'd love to know what the title of that would be and why. Ultimately, when you're looking back on what you want your legacy to be.
Oh man, that's a good one. Actually, so, The Office has been a perennial favorite show for my wife and I, and so sometimes I've enjoyed Michael Scott's character when he said the book he was writing, Somehow I Managed. I was like, oh my god, that's the title I want for my book, but it's his already. So I um, no, I think if I were actually to be honest with you, I think it would be what's the difference?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I,
and I mean, you could take Somehow I Manage. It's not like it. There's no book on the shelf from Michael Scott or even from Steve Carell.
yeah.
Called Somehow I Manage. So you could still publish a book or a documentary with that title. But
Yeah, perhaps that would be the sequel. But I think the opener, the original one, would be "What's the Difference?" is probably what I would. Yeah, if I would call it "What's the Difference?"
cool. What's the difference? That's what it's about. What's
Yep.
the difference? But do you have any just for people to keep up with you, what you're doing, all the work you're doing? Because there's a lot more for them to catch up on. Where can people go to keep up with you?
Ah, yeah, I guess on Twitter, it's at G Nagesh Rao.
Mm-hmm.
Is my Twitter handle, and then probably LinkedIn. And then from time to time, I write op-eds, and they get featured in like TechCrunch or The Hill or something of that nature. But Twitter at G Nagesh Rao on Twitter, and my LinkedIn account on LinkedIn, G Nagesh Rao, are the two where people can see me most active on my professional endeavors.
Yeah. And I just want to say as we're wrapping up, I appreciate you taking the time out and chatting with you and having this conversation. And that's one reason I love to have these one. That's one reason I love 108 Degrees of Impact and what it is and what it continues to be. But really, even more, just want to thank you for being so social and having conversations with people all the time, because I can't even imagine how many people want a little bit of your time, and yet the fact that you make it, that makes a huge difference. Just to be able to have conversations with people and give a little bit of your knowledge and experience and personality and amazing comic book shirts
Uh,
to the world.
no, thank you. And Matt, you've been doing a fantastic job at Second Museum with launch and with the Space House Challenge. So
Thank you.
you've been doing excellent work there. So it's not me who you should be in awe of. It's you that I should be in awe of, because you're also making a change, and you're doing this
Yeah.
documentation. And more importantly, I think you know um, the conversation. You're spurring conversation, and I think that's important. Half the battle is just people willing to get in the same room and talk.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, but I think little by little, I always, going back to MLK, and I'm totally going to probably butcher this quote, so I'll see how it goes. But like the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, and so I
Yep.
think, like, and even just looking at technology, that we see that adoption of some things that we probably would have thought 20 years ago would not be something that, like, my mom, who I always rag on my mom on these for some reason, I feel bad because I know she's watching, but my mom, 20 years ago, maybe we wouldn't have thought she would have adopted a certain technology, and now she's adopted. And I think just similarly with social impact, we're seeing more and more people embrace that and embrace the drive for justice. And so there will be more conversation, but it's important to have some of these conversations. Someone has to start. That's how I think of it. So.
And I'm glad you mentioned your mom, because that's actually, parents are important.
Uh-huh.
Moms are really important,
Mm-hmm.
because moms set the tone.
Yeah.
Dads are there. Dad's there to help, and dads are important too. Don't get me wrong,
Uh-huh.
but I think if anything, it's mom.
Yeah.
Mom sets the tone, and it's why we refer to Earth as Mother Earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why we refer to to a lot of different things in the feminine form, not out of, at least I don't see it out of like
Yeah.
this gender hierarchy or something of the sort. I see it out of adoration.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I'm Hindu, right? So in the Hindu pantheon, there are three sets of main gods. I mean, there are gazillion gods in the Hindu pantheon, but there are three main sets, and that's Brahma, Saraswati, Lakshmi, Narayana, and Shiva Parvati, right? So and what that did is that it showed the confluence of those deities together. So Brahma is the god of creation, and it's a male form, but his consort, his wife, is Saraswati, the goddess of education. And the notion there is that one cannot create without knowledge. So that's the first set of deities. And then the next set is Lakshmi Narayana. And Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth, and Narayana is the god of sustenance. And so the notion is that one cannot have sustenance without wealth, resources. So that's, the Lakshmi Vishnu paradox. And then, not paradox, but the confluence. And then you've got, Parvati Shiva, and that too is a representation of the ideal marriage kind of thing. And so they, Parvati is, whom women go to for blessing of a good marriage, and Shiva is who we pray to for, the understanding of life as it continues forward. And so, it's a unique world, and that in itself has its own unique stories of interest that one can learn from.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. My mom's really going to love that because she teaches a college professor teaching world religions and sociology and a bunch of other things. And so I appreciate it, but I'm going to make sure she sees that part. And again, if my mom or anyone else wants to learn more about 180 Degrees of Impact, they could check out www.lets.care, at Let's You Care on social media, all of the platforms. And thanks again, Nagesh. It means a lot to have this conversation, and I'm glad we could have it. And just as I wrap up for everyone who's watching, and as I say at the end of each and every one of these interviews and conversations, keep impacting. And I'll also add, what's the difference? Right. Yeah. But thanks again.
You're welcome, Matt. Take care.